Hello, we're ready to start our next Art 127 watercolor lesson on watercolor, temperature, and intensity. What we're going to cover today are pigment properties. Once again, we're going to talk about methods that we're going to learn. We're going to talk about some art concepts. We'll show you some example paintings, example charts, and finally the last thing we'll talk about is a theme painting, how you might go about approaching that. So, reminder of the properties of pigment that we've been discussing, the overview kind of the course. We've discussed hue, which is a color name, value, which is the measure of light to dark. This time we're going to really focus on temperature, which is a measure of whether a color is warm or cool, and intensity, which is a measure of whether a color is bright to dull along that spectrum. In future lessons, we're going to talk about transparency and staining qualities. That'll be lesson 5, and then finally granulation. Well, we want to talk about temperature in terms of whether it feels cooler or warmer. So overall, this side of the chart is definitely warm. So red, yellow, and orange are definitely warm colors. Colors of the sun, colors of fire. We associate them with warm temperatures. Where it gets a little tricky is on the other 3 colors. Well, definitely blue is cool. It's the color of water, the color of the sky. We associate blue definitely with cool. And it's truly the only colors that doesn't have a warm element to it. Because if we take green, for instance, we have to use yellow with blue to get to green. So there is a warm element in all greens, as well as in violets. There's a red in all violets. So some violets have more red than other violets, like this is cobalt blue violet, and this is rosa ultramarine. So this skews more to the red violet side than to the blue violet side, like cobalt blue violet does. But both of them have a little bit of red in it, so they have a warm element, as does green. Typically, in general, we refer to anything along from here and to the left on your screen as cool colors, and these are warm colors. But it's not exactly true because some greens are very warm. So temperature bias really affects intensity when mixing. And temperature is relative. So overall, red is warm, right? But this red isn't as warm as this red. This red appears to have more orange in it, or it's over on this side. Whereas this red appears to have more blue or violet in it. So when we want to determine the bias of especially our primary colors, red, yellow, and blue, and there's, dozens and dozens of each, when you get into a store of each kind of reds and dozens of yellows and dozens of blues. So it's relative. So a red can be on a spectrum from very red orange all the way to very blue, red violet. So we call the reds that appear to have blue in them cool reds, and reds that appear to have yellow in them warm reds. So they skew orange and these skew violet. On the yellow side, if a yellow appears to have orange in it or red in it, we call that a warm yellow. And a yellow that appears to have green or blue in it, we call that a cool yellow. And then the blues, if a blue appears to have green in it or yellow to make it greenish, we call that a cool blue. And if a blue appears to have red in it, we call that a warm red. So a red that skews more towards violet is warm. a blue that skews more towards violet is warm, and a blue that skews more towards turquoise is cool. I guess I got a little ahead of myself. Anyway, so why do we care about this? Well, we can create a different mood with a cool red than we can with a red hot engine red. We can, but mostly we want to be careful when mixing because mixing will affect the next property of color, which we'll talk about, which is intensity. And we can also create, as in value, a sense of distance or aerial perspective. So as we get back into the distance, a cooler red appears further away, a warm red will feel closer. Same thing, a warm blue will appear closer than a cool blue. Most of the time, there's this intensity factor that affects this as well. So cool things tend to recede and warm things tend to come forward. So we have to be careful with that, but it's really important to, when we're mixing, and you'll do a whole exercise on that. I'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so let's talk about intensity. So if you look at these two pictures, one's really bright and intense color, and the other is very gray neutral colors. Both of them are color paintings, not involving any black or white, but the color has been neutralized a lot, and this one, the color has been left in almost its pure state. So intensity then is a measure of bright to dull. So if you think of neon, that's closer to bright, and dull, which is grays and blacks. So we can decrease intensity by adding water. So if you thin down the paint, it's not as intense as if it's nice and thick and strong. We can add white to pigment, and there's been a little bit of white added into this painting. Or we can add black. I don't typically use black in watercolor, but lots of artists do, and there's nothing wrong with that. And you can also add a color's complement. So in this painting, I've used a very cool blue and a very warm red, which are almost complements, to create this sort of gray color. So they're almost complements. So if you can mix complements, that'll also neutralize the color or make it less intense. And you want to mix colors further apart on the color wheel. So if you think back to the color wheel from the previous slide, so the cool blue and the warm red are further apart in the color wheel. So those are going to neutralize more. But if I really want to neutralize blue, I want to use an orange pigment. So again, why do we care? Well, you definitely can create a different mood. This one's bright and stimulating, and this one's soft and cuddly. And temperature bias from the previous slide affects the intensity when we're mixing paint. As I was talking about, the further away the colors are on the color wheel from each other, the more neutral the effect. You can also create a sense of distance or area perspective, just like with value and just like with temperature. Things that are more neutral tend to appear farther away. Things that are brighter and more intense tend to feel closer to us. So there are some blues that are very intense, and there are some reds that are very intense, and some blues that are not so intense at all. So you'll get to learn your pigments. Each pigment is different. All right, so then let's talk about the painting methods we're going to talk about this time. We're going to do wet to dry. We're going to be on wet paper, and we're going to dry it back to damp. We did this in the previous lesson as well. It gives us a little bit of time and eliminates some of the streaks in our variegated wash. So we're going to have a demonstration on how to wet the paper and how to get it back to the damp state rather than going in when it's super wet. And then we're going to do variegated washes. So 2 or more colors. So variegated means 2 or more colors. And it can be mostly flat. We're going to work flat washes here. So flat means one value, but you can also do a graded wash that's variegated. So remember, that's a graded wash varies in value from dark to light or light to dark. And because we're introducing wet to dry, the flat wash, the graded wash, or the variegated wash, you can use the wet to dry method to minimize the streaks. Typically in this lesson, we're only going to do the wet to dry on the first layer. The best watercolor paper for this method, or these methods, are probably cold press, but rough is good as well. Right, a new concept I want you to think about is the rule of thirds. So we haven't discussed too much about how to lay out your composition, but when you do this, I recommend you do some planning on tracing paper and use tracing paper that's the same size as your ultimate painting. In this lesson, the assignment, you're gonna have to do something that's a minimum of 80 square inches, so 8 by 10 or larger. But an eighth of a sheet is 7.5 by 11.5, so that satisfies the requirement of 80 square inches. And then you're going to establish your outer format or boundary, which will be basically your taped edge. So you're going to come in a little bit, which will make your image about 7 by 11 if you use an eighth of a sheet. Anyway, so you're going to set up this rule of thirds. So think of it like a tic-tac-toe format. And you're going to separate the horizontal side and the vertical side into equal thirds. And then where those lines cross, that's a candidate for where you want to place a focal point. And this is just an example that I did a few years ago using a tracing paper planning. It doesn't look like it here, but this tracing paper was the same size as the ultimate painting. But if you draw your plan onto tracing paper, you can do it, for one, it erases a lot easier. And then you can outline your critical lines and then transfer that drawing to your watercolor paper so you have less lines on your watercolor paper and you don't have a bunch of erasing, because erasing actually does damage the paper a little bit. So then you only have to transfer the outline drawing to your paper. So it might behoove you to plan on paper where you can erase and adjust, and then when you finally make your decisions, you can just transfer up the main marks. But again, the rule of thirds is an easy way to set up your composition so that you get what you want your audience to see at a critical point. It gets you out of the middle of the paper, because you don't typically want to put what's important right smack dab in the middle of the paper. And you can plan. So plan to put your most important information at one of those cross sections. And then you can also have secondary focal points, which is what I did here. I've got another bird down here that's not as bright and contrasty as this one. Or some would argue that the flower is actually the focal point. Okay, another concept we want to talk about is color harmony. We talked about color harmony before. We've talked about monochromatic color harmony, which is one color or impression of one color, and that was the last lesson. This time we're going to talk about complementary harmony. So complementary harmony, if you're on the color wheel, that's this one down here, you want to use opposite colors. So if you're using red-violet, you want to use yellow-green. If you want to use red, you want to use green. You tend to get a lot of neutrals when you do a complementary color harmony painting. Another one that we're going to have you apply in the last lesson, analogous color harmony. So this one was monochromatic harmony. So mono means one, chrome means color. So monochromatic color harmony is this one here, where you're just using one color or impression of one color throughout. Analogous color harmony means adjacent on the color wheel. So this is a series of bookmarks that I made that have all the different analogous color combinations in 2s or 3s. So you can use 2 colors, 3 colors, or 4 colors of color harmony, but you want them to be adjacent on the color wheel. So red, red, orange, and orange, or you can go all the way from red to yellow and then have orange in between. They want to be together on the color wheel. You can use 2 primaries and a secondary. You can use 2 secondaries, violet and green, and what's in between is a blue. But for your assignment, you have to use 2 primaries and a secondary color. So you're going to mix the secondary color, and you have to choose the one that's going to be the brightest intensity. So here's an example analogous color harmony painting that goes from green to violet. So in this painting, a blue was used, a green, tube green, sap green, ultramarine blue, and red violet called Rose of Ultramarine was used in this painting. So that satisfies this analogous color harmony scheme there. Here's some other examples, two of which are mine. One is which a painter I really admire, Brenda Swenson. So in this one is an example of something you might want to do. So it's taken a red and a blue and mixing the purple in between, or the violet in between, to get a very pleasing, calming, analogous color harmony. And this one was red, yellow, and the mix makes orange. And this one is blue and yellow and the combination of green. So those are some ideas of color harmonies that you would satisfy your requirements for the exercise 3. And there's the details. So a yellow, an orange, and a red. And you want to use the warm yellow and the warm red because they're closer together to make the brightest orange. And in this case, the yellow and the blue, you want to use a cool yellow and a cool blue to make a good vibrant green. And for a red and a blue, you want to use a cool red and a warm blue to mix the most intense and pretty violet. So here's some examples. So exercise 1, you have to do the color chart. You have to chart your primary colors, and you have to set up the reds and the yellows and the blues in the right order around the color wheel with the temperature association in the assignment. The second exercise, you'll have a video to watch on this, and you have to mix all your secondary colors using the Chi formula, and that's the video that you'll watch. Mix all the combinations, and at the end you have to put these formulas together, and then you have to tell me which of your squares is the brightest and which is the dullest of the greens and the oranges and the purple mixes. The assignment 3, which is your temperature painting example. So you have to use analogous color harmony, 2 primary colors to mix a secondary color, and a variegated wash. So it brings it all together, all the concepts together. And you're going to pick a shape that is associated with your theme in order to make sure that your exercise has a theme associated with it. In summary then, by the end of this lesson, you will have learned a new painting method, the wet to dry variegated wash layered painting. You'll understand the pigment properties of temperature and intensity. You'll have completed a color wheel chart of your primary colors, 6 primary colors showing temperature bias. You'll have completed a secondary color intensity chart, and you'll have painted an analogous color harmony painting using the 2 primary colors that make the brightest secondary and a 2-layer variegated wash painting. Our next lesson is the white lesson. You'll learn to save the white of the paper, retrieve whites once painted, paint whites using white paint. We'll bring in a new art concept for triadic color harmony. We've already discussed monochromatic, complementary, and analogous. Now we're going to bring in triadic color harmony. We're going to create a white chart and a white subject painting. So that concludes the lesson on temperature and intensity for Art 127 watercolor. Thank you for listening. Good luck. Feel free to ask questions after you have watched the video lectures and read the instructions.